Hi, David. Thank you so much for helping my project. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about yourself.
I'm David Forbes. My day job is a pipeline designer. I create engineering drawings for the construction of pipelines. I've done it all the way from board drafting to writing software that automatically generates the drawings, usually using AutoCAD and GIS software. And I've dabbled in a bunch of other things, computer animation and music production and video production and things like that on the side, and then I've had some hobbies in building and making things. I'm a member of TXRX Labs, and sometimes I dabble in making and building things as well.
That's pretty amazing. What kind of software do you use to automate it, or automate the generation of pipeline diagrams?
I use there's two things. The software that I write is in the Autolisp programming language, and it runs on top of AutoCAD. And I use AutoCAD Map and AutoCAD Civil 3D. There's also programs that are pretty, you can just buy for that purpose. But then I've created some of my own as well to do certain types of drawings, and also to help with other procedures involved in processing the data that you get from mapping, because it comes in as survey data, and then we put in our designs on top of the survey data, and I have to manipulate that and to generate information about the route and the design itself, and to keep track of the materials and what's pipe sizes and pipe wall thicknesses and curves and all this kind of stuff. You gotta have all the engineering details about this stuff, and I write software which helps in generating spreadsheets that lists all this kind of information, things like that.
That's pretty amazing. How has pipeline design changed over time? I mean,
I started doing it with a drafting board. So yeah, it's very different. And I went from drafting board to doing using CAD, and we just did, and the stuff was very crude. And you spend a lot of time just taking field notes. I spent a lot of time just taking field notes and then putting it all together and then drawing it out on the into a engineering drawing or base map that the drawings are made from. And then we went, and from there when I first started, there was no imagery, and then eventually aerial photography come along, so we could add aerial photography into CAD at the same time, and that came along. Then later we got stuff where the sheet automation programs come along, and then we started getting more becoming more sophisticated, and the survey data they used to collect was very simple. Very simplistic, and then it got more sophisticated, where it's gotten more into GIS, where you have more information in the database, and then it's gotten a lot more sophisticated. The early drawings, we didn't even have a profile of the surface of the, and then now we do stuff where we have a profile of the whole surface, and we engineer the pipe depths and the overbends, underbends, and do calculations as far as is the pipe being bent too much, and you have to put in a manufactured bend in locations to make sure that you don't stress the pipe unnecessarily, and all this kind of stuff. It's a whole lot more sophisticated than what it used to be.
I was just thinking of a fun project that I might try to recruit you on sometime, just a goofy project. There's those permanently shadowed craters on the moon's surface, or, in the poles. And, there's some thoughts that this might be a really good resource to, to turn into rocket fuel and what have you. But you're going to need to be able to get that ice out of the crater and melt it and use it for something. And I could imagine you need some type of piping system for that. Any thoughts on how your work might apply to a project like that?
You would want to first map and know the locations where the ice is going to be at, I would imagine. I don't know that you would want, it wouldn't be practical probably to build a pipeline for that. I would imagine they would it's just going to be solid, and well, I don't know. and they haven't really looked into that. And that's, you could, I can imagine you might could you have to find a way of, depends on how also how the ice is situated. If it's in you know, mixed in with dirt and soil, then you're gonna have to separate the water from the dirt, and so there's going to be a lot of issues with that. Um, and in a vacuum, I think water might sublimate directly into gas instead of just going to liquid. So you won't be able to have a liquid. And so there's issues with that. And so I don't know, there's a whole lot of engineering issues that I know that you're going to come across that wouldn't, and the quantities also, that there's not enough equipment that you, when you go, we go and to carry the pipes and stuff there, you're not going to have very big pipes. They're probably going to be small, and you can only process so much of it because you're going to rely on solar energy to do your heating and then to do your separation and all that stuff. And so you're stuck with how much power you can generate from solar panels and how much you can process in a certain time. It's going to be a slow process. So they'll probably set it up so that they'll extract out some water, and then it will run 24 hours a day. You know, and on the moon, you've got, you know, sunlight for half a month, at, you know, 14 days, 2 weeks at a time. So you're gonna have to deal with you probably process for nonstop 24 hours a day for that time to and create a certain amount of fuel. And you're going to be limited to how much fuel you can produce by how much solar energy you can produce from your solar panels. And then so you have to have the weight constraints of getting the solar panels there, and then you have the pipes are probably going to be small because you're only be doing, it's going to be a little kind of a trickle. It's not going to be very like in large quantities like we can do here on Earth. And it will probably do, you know, the quantities and stuff are going to be small, and then it's going to have to take a long time to do the process, I imagine. But I don't know. That's the whole. I'm sure there's a whole lot of things that the engineers have to think about, you know, to make all that kind of stuff happen.
Yeah, I mean, the thermal shifts are unlike anything that we have here on the Earth. Between, like, I think in, like, you know, the sunlight side, you have something close to 200 degrees Celsius, and on the shadow side, you have like negative 200 degrees Celsius, and
Yeah.
you have to be able to handle that.
Well, it occurred to me that you know, typically we think about using solar panels and sunlight to generate all electricity. But with the huge thermal difference, I imagine that the one way that they can be able to generate power, even when it's dark on the dark side, is to use thermal and to bury some pipes under the regolith, and then and during the daytime you use Stirling cycle engines to generate the power, and use that as a heat sink. So in sunlight, you use the heat the moon's surface as a heat sink, and you heat that up, and you go through the difference in temperatures to drive your Stirling cycle engines, which are heat engines, your mechanical machines that run off strictly off of heat. And then when it goes to the moons at night, then you do the opposite, and you have this radiators on the surface, and then you take the heat from the moon itself and do the reverse, and then extract the heat from there into the very cold space, and then generate your electricity that way. So you can generate electricity even when you're in the dark. I believe that's possible. I might need to talk to somebody who knows, who's more knowledgeable than I am on that subject, you know.
Well, and that allows for you also to keep most of the system buried too, unlike solar panels that have to be on the surface. And, you know, that could protect from micrometeors and radiation and, you know, debris flying around as a result of things landing on the moon and kicking it up. So
yeah, they'll have to. Yeah, they'll have to. They're talking about burying the habitats and stuff. I'll just talk about strictly as a like a heat pump in air conditioning on Earth. You have pipes in the ground for a heat sink, and you circulate liquids through that, and you use that for temperature difference, and you use that as a heat sink to move your heat around from one place to the other.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it offers a lot of advantages over just you know, on surface set of solar panels. Like you said, you could use it in both the night phase and the day phase. But, you know, also, I mean, one disadvantage of having solar panels on the surface is potentially the radiation is going to make the solar panels last less, than you have, debris and stuff. But it sounds like the system you're describing could be well more protected and insulated as well.
I would think it wouldn't generate as much electricity as you can with the solar panels directly, but it would probably keep things running even when you're in nighttime, because you have to deal with the being at nighttime for 2 weeks, on the moon. So that would be an issue, but that would be one way of doing it without having to rely on just nuclear, thermonuclear, which is probably the most common thing they're doing today,
And I guess, how did you get into mechanical design and mechanical drafting? Like, what led you to that field?
Right out of high school, I took drafting in high school, and when I graduated high school, it was during the energy crisis. I graduated high school in '77, and so the energy crisis was going on, and so there was a mad dash to beef up the production of oil, because the OPEC had cut us off. OPEC cut off the oil supplies the United States, and there's a mad rush to do that. So I was able to started working with right out of high school for a survey drafting company called Gullet and Associates, and they were making pipelines like mad, as fast as they could possibly do, and so that's where I got into it.
That's pretty neat. Have you thought about going into aerospace, or kind of moving into a space?
Well, I've dabbled in other things in music and video production and stuff like that. That's what I really wanted to do at first, and then pipeline engineering and design engineering is something that I just kind of fell into, you might say. Although I haven't really looked at going into aerospace. I had reached such a level in my field that that I would be a beginner, starting out. If I went into, I could be, maybe a model builder or do 3D modeling in CAD or whatnot, do that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't be a designer because I don't know enough. It takes a while to learn those sorts of things. At least that's the way it was. I haven't tried it. Now I'm used to be making some good money because I was, very, very high up in my industry, because there's only a handful of people who can do some of the things I can do. And I was usually the lead person in developing stuff at large corporations. I mean, the largest companies on the planet that do that kind of work, so very high up in my field. So to do a completely different field, then you're lower down on the totem pole, you might say.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Do you design any pipelines that carry liquefied natural gas?
Yeah, well, I haven't done any that was LNG. I worked on I did civil work for an LNG plant in Africa. That was, it was just, and all I designed was the ditches. We designed the roads and the ditches, and I made the model of all the ditches. And it was a large plant that was, like a couple miles square. It was, the size of a small city. And so I did all these roads and did the modeling for that. But I wasn't involved in the actual piping or any of that sort, or in the process. All your disciplines are broken up into different specialties. There's some people who do just the piping, and some people do just electrical, and somebody do just instrumentation. And I was doing the civil. I was a lead in the civil development.
And that's interesting, because I was just thinking, what SpaceX is doing down there in Boca Chica. They're having to move around large amounts of liquefied natural gas, between like storage units and their test articles and things like that. Just kind of interesting. But I guess coming to the topic of this discussion, when did you find out that NASA is planning to land people on the moon in 2024?
I've probably known since the beginning. I'm a bit of a SpaceX, Elon Musk fanboy, you might say. And so I follow all that stuff. My cable channel, my cable box is permanently set to the NASA channel. So as soon as I turn it on, it's on NASA TV. And so I follow that stuff, and I've watched the launches and the landings of the SpaceX first stages, you know, the Falcon 9. And so I always have an interest in that. So I've always kind of known whenever they talk about it. Of course, it's changed, you know. You know, they seem from other administrations, they talk about they're going to do this, and then they said, oh, we're not going to go there. We're going to do this instead. And, well, we're going to put the gateway up, and we're going to or put a little space station around the moon, and blah, 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 blah. And it's always changing, you know, so you have to kind of keep up with it, you know, if you're interested, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the Constellation program, whenever, like the vision for space exploration, I think that's what it's called back during George Bush Jr.'s time. They were talking about having a moon base on the moon, I think, in 2020, and here we are, 2020. No signs of a moon base. But
well, I didn't. When Bush said that, I thought he was lying. To be quite frank, because if you can talk about it, but if you're not going to put the money into it, and you know, really push on it, it's not going to happen. Those things just don't happen overnight. I mean, it's really kind of amazing. If it wasn't for the competition with the Russians, we wouldn't have gone to the moon, and we probably have just now gotten to the moon for the first time at this time in this time frame. Because if it wasn't for that impetus to be, you know, we got to show up the Russians, you know, there wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have happened. I don't think it would have been a lot slower. You know, we're also kind of fortunate right now that we have Elon Musk to do what he's doing, because the industry has gotten to where they don't they've gotten really kind of complacent. I don't think they spend our money on our taxpayer money on stuff, but they don't deliver. I was so disappointed. A friend of mine developed the avionics for the X-38. It was a little craft. It was like a little space shuttle that was supposed to come back from the ISS, and it was a lifeboat in case of emergency. They would, you know, be able to get on this middle of the ship and then come back in to the Earth and leave and evacuate the ISS. And that thing, they got almost ready to launch it. In fact, they even put it. It was already on the schedule to launch in the shuttle bay and all this kind of stuff. And then they cut the funds for it, and it just didn't happen. So they spent all that money on its development and on the test and building it. And they had the thing under construction, and they built the prototypes, and they flew the prototypes and then all stuff, but it never did actually work. I mean, they ever did actually get put up. We spent all that money and got nothing for it. And that kind of thing has happened. You know, that's been disappointing in the industry. But fortunately, we have Elon Musk, who's getting things done, and he's really serious about getting things done. And he's, you know, it may take a little longer than what he originally says, but he's getting there, and it's happening, you know, for real, you know. And he's accomplished things that other people, they just talk about it, but it never does actually materialize. And there have been so many programs we've had in the past that there's been other replacements for space shuttle that they had worked on and developed and even flown some hardware, from what I understand, but it just never did happen. Things come along and they said, well, we changed our mind, and we're gonna cut the budget, or we're gonna change direction, and then the taxpayers, you know, spend all that money for stuff that didn't get nothing for it, and that's really disappointing, you know, to me, you know. So, but things are happening now, and that's look forward to that.
Yeah, and not many people know about our plans to go back to the moon in 2024, but I think most people know about SpaceX launching those 2 astronauts to the International Space Station. So I think people are far more interested in what's actually happening as opposed to what's planned to happen.
Yeah, talk is cheap. You know, you can always talk about stuff, but when it actually goes and works, that's what matters.
What do you think it would take for us actually to land people on the moon in 2024?
I don't have any personal direct knowledge of anybody who's working on it, so I can't say how things are progressing. We're, you know, things seem to be moving forward slowly, but I don't know what's actually going on with the details. So I just see the announcements. Blue Origin is had built a lander, and SpaceX has got, they're working on their Starship. It's under development, and so they've been slowly moving forward with that. So I don't know for sure how it's going, unless you're privy to the actual knowledge, or maybe I have to look a little closer. It's hard to know what's exactly going on. But hopefully they'll be able to get it going. I think they had dropped the idea of initially they were going to have to use the gateway to go to the gateway first and then to the moon, but I think they've dropped that, and they're going to go directly to the moon and skip the gateway, because the gateway is going to take a little longer to get up and running. But we'll see.
And so if we do actually send people to the moon on 2024, do you see yourself throwing a party or celebrating, or what will you be doing?
I'll certainly be watching. I'll certainly watch the launch and watch the landing, and I'm sure we can all be able to see that on TV or on YouTube or whatever. So I'll be paying attention. It won't be like one day, because it takes 3 days to get there. So there'll be a day when they launch, and then a couple of days later, they'll leave orbit, and a couple of days later they'll get to the moon, and then the next day they'll be doing the actual landing, and so it's going to be spread out. It won't be with it happening within an hour.
Yeah, indeed. Definitely lots of events, almost like a week-long or 2-week-long party, maybe, with like little events happening with the astronauts going to the moon, and then like little activities and seminars and stuff. And it could be kind of neat. We could maybe put something together.
Yeah, well, hopefully we won't be dealing with a virus that keeps us all home and having to stay away from each other and everything. Hope we can get a little more social. In a few months from now.
Yeah, everybody could come, but they have to bring their own spacesuit. So whenever you think about space exploration, how does it fit into your view of the world and humanity and stuff? Do you see, as an example, if you look out 500 years, do you think humanity is still just on the Earth, or have we actually branched out to the moon and to Mars and the moons of Jupiter and moons of Saturn? And what's the future of humanity, and how does space relate to that?
Yeah. Well, I'm one of those who agree with what Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking said, and that we think that the future of humanity is going to be really the long-term future of humanity is dependent on us getting beyond the Earth and living somewhere else as well, in living on Mars or living in space agents or whatever. And so I agree with that idea, and I think we should endeavor in making that our future. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It isn't the reason is, of course, is the idea of that an asteroid or some other calamity could end life on the Earth. The other is, I think, is the resources. There are some resources that are getting much more difficult to find. The amount of effort that we put into doing offshore oil exploration is really tremendous. I mean, they spend the amount of money we spend on those kind of things is equal to the kind of things going to the moon. They're on par with as far as the amount of engineering expertise and the amount of money that is spent doing deep water exploration and drilling and production. And so it will eventually become to get some resources especially the rare metals and such, that the best place to get it will be from asteroids. And so there's going to be, eventually that will be an impetus for us to have an economy that actually to go in space and make money from space. And I think that's going to eventually happen. And of course, to do that, there will be as it also becomes cheaper, cheaper makes a big difference as well, because everybody today has a computer, But in the 50s and 60s, computers were these big room-sized things that cost millions of dollars, and nobody owned. People who owned them was big businesses. But when they can get cheap, then everybody can have their own computer. And by the same token, when it comes cheap to go to space, and where the biggest expense is just the burning of the fuel to get out of orbit, then lots more people can do it, and it becomes more common. Then it becomes people can tourist trade could tourism could be a real a viable business, and we think that and that's going to probably happen within the next 20 years. Something that's going to be pretty kind of common, in probably 20 to 30 years time frame. And so I think by 500 years, we should, by 500 years from now, we should, hopefully we don't screw up and kill ourselves with atomic bombs or something, we should definitely be out there with at least part of us, a few of us living permanently off the earth. And that should be a viable thing, I believe. And I think it is our future. It may take a little longer than what we would like it to happen, those of us who are interested in that sort of thing. But I think it will actually happen.
Yeah, I know that part about the nuclear war. I've been doing some thinking about that lately, and I wanted to run a thought by you. I feel like that as generations go on with living more and more in peace, sort of the horrors of war become less and less pronounced. And the things needed to kind of maintain peace become more and more questioned and questionable, and there's less need for it. I think, back like 30, 40 years ago, pretty much everybody knew somebody that lost somebody in war or was injured in war. Whereas today, I think the vast majority of people actually don't know anybody that's been adversely affected by war, and really see that as being more of a theoretical type of thing, or maybe even romanticize about it to some degree. And I was wondering if you saw this type of thing, and if you thought that was maybe increasing our chances of actually running into some type of disaster like that.
Well, hopefully we're doing better. We're still the kind of problems we deal with today are less less severe than in the past, and so overall, slowly but surely, I think humanity is getting better. There's a joke that the aliens don't visit us because we're such a-holes, and but I think we're slowly but surely we're getting better at that, and we're having to learn, and some people having to learn the hard way to think more rationally and have have more respect for other human beings, because we've at least it used to be common. People used to say like, oh, things are bad today and it was better in the past. Well, that's not true. You look at the past and things were terrible in the past. I mean, slavery was common, and some of the things, the way people treated each other was really awful. And things are getting better. And I think slowly but surely humanity is coming around and growing up a little bit at a time. I think we are growing, overall. I mean, some people have to be dragged kicking and screaming to act like, civil human beings, I mean, we have these people who don't want to wear a mask, and when they're in public, and don't understand this irrational, selfish behavior that without really looking at the big picture and what it's all about. And so we're having to learn slowly but surely. But I think things are getting, in the long run, are getting better, and that hopefully that war is, as time goes by, becomes less and less a possibility. We had this when we had the problem with 9/11. The situation was you have these people from the Middle East who really lived from the Middle Ages. They had a culture and a mentality from the Middle Ages, and they all of a sudden were thrust from modern times onto the world stage. And all of a sudden, these people who were As long as they're fighting against their neighbor, you know, it's not a big deal. But when they get their hands on more more serious weapons or more dangerous weapons, then they become a danger to the rest of us. And they still haven't gotten this idea that they're just not their idea of their little tribe mentality is not the way things are, and we are a world of people, and they're just because they think the things should be done one way doesn't mean it's right, and they haven't grown up. Whereas, you know, you see the culture in Europe, and they tend to be less, have some attitudes that we don't have here in the United States. We're having to catch up with them. And I think they had to learn the hard way with World War II. They had so much devastation after World War II that they really understand the depths of how serious war could be, and they had their cities destroyed, and all that fighting happened over there. So they have a different perspective. Over here in the United States, we had it easy, really, because we didn't get bombed except for Pearl Harbor. We didn't get bombed and have a lot of the issues that they had to deal with. And so we took us longer to having to learn the hard way that this, you know, how to be civil to other people, other human beings. And but I think it's getting better. I think in the long run it's getting better.
Yeah, you know, it's just that fact that every generation is born ignorant, and I think there's the presumption that that generation knows everything and has the same viewpoints and same history as the generation that's currently alive whenever they're born. And, you know, unless there's a concerted effort to intentionally teach them about the past, I mean, there's no reason why they would know it. And then you go and see them kind of grow up and take power and repeat a lot of the same mistakes. And, you know, it's just like, I mean, how do you address that? I mean, it seems like a big problem.
Yeah, it's an issue because there are some people just, I don't know, there's politics involved too, and there's we have an anti-intellectual culture here in the United States. At least it's been a problem that some people don't look at, have that kind of view, and they are still living in the past a little bit. And slowly but surely, I think it's people have to grow up and learn to be more civil, you know. And I think it's happening, but it just is kind of a struggle in the meantime to get to all these people, the people who are just stubborn and don't want to learn how to treat other human beings respectfully. That it's good. Eventually, they'll just have to learn, you know. And I think we can see it here, having to deal with this virus. There's some issues with that, and that some of it's coming to light. I think some people are, you know, going to come around and see that. Well, you know, we're going to have to take this serious, and we have to not just be emotional about it, but, you know, be rational about what we do and how we do it, you know, and learn that there's just some hard lessons to be learned, you know, and we just have to see, you know, hopefully it will happen, and there won't be some mess up along the way.
Yeah, I mean, this virus has been really difficult from a social standpoint too, not just not being able to contact and do the things that you used to before, but also the way it affects people very differently, in the sense of, you know, I work from home even before this virus. I mean, that's why I created this project. I was planning for this project to force me to get out on a daily basis and talk to a person in person, because whenever I started in December, I was talking to people at coffee shops, at the mall, you know, at the bus station, and things like this. It's just forced me to get out there and actually see another human person a day. So this is like my cure for social distancing. So now we're doing it on Zoom because of social distancing. But I work from home, so my job's like not affected at all. But you know, the person that works at like the restaurant, our works as an Uber driver or works on the airlines, their job's eliminated. They have no source of income. And then on top of that, they probably have no reserves, and they probably are renters, and they're probably several months behind on their rent at this point, and being evicted and what have you. And it's just like, it's easy for me to say everybody needs to be like safe and stay at home and all of this, because, honestly, that's what I was doing before this anyway, was pretty much just stuck at my house. But it's a very different experience for somebody who's dependent upon those jobs and in that circumstance. And just wondering, how do we address that from a social standpoint? What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I kind of, I thought it was interested in back in during the Depression. They had there's a lot of parks and stuff that was built at that time, and they put people to work and had jobs, created jobs that help us all. Like building. There's when I was a kid, we would go camping and go to state parks and such, and there would be one of the buildings there. It was built during that era, and so there's we have a lot of infrastructure, things that needs to be fixed. We have old bridges that need to be replaced and stuff. So there's really plenty of things that I think that we could do to keep people busy. And I would like to do, I know some people are against the government from doing things like that because they just think that the marketplace is going to take care of it, and I don't think that's going to happen. There are some things that we have to do from a government perspective, and to do it has to be a project that is less selfish, whereas in the marketplace everything is selfish and it's strictly for to make a profit and for one person, to make one person rich or one group of people rich. And we need to have a mentality that isn't always the best way. Sometimes that works the best way and sometimes it doesn't. And in this situation, we need, we no longer live in the way we did as cavemen. And when we lived back in the day, before modern times, anybody, if you need to eat, you could go pick a berry, go hunt an animal or something. You can do it. It's just up to you to just take the initiative and go feed yourself. Well, you can't do that no more. All the land is owned by somebody or owned by the government or whatever. You can't, if you're hungry, you just can't go and shoot an animal and eat it. And you just can't do that. And we built into our society with taxation on land and all the other things that we do, that we are all dependent on each other. And I know that some people want to worry about me, but the fact is, we all depend on each other. And even people who are poor, there's consumers. They have to live. They have to have some place to live. They have to something to eat and all that stuff. So they're consumers, and they are providing. Even if they're not working, they're still going to be consuming. So they're employing somebody else, and that's really how things work. It isn't like the people who run the businesses are just the job givers. It doesn't work like that. It's the demand for the needs of people is what drives the economy. And that's why we need a healthy middle class where people can make a good living. It's those people, the money needs to be more in the middle class than in the very wealthy, because they're the ones who spend the money, and they're the ones, when they spend the money, then somebody has to provide the services that they are buying. And it's the marketplace that drives everything. It isn't the people who own the businesses, it's the marketplace itself. And that is the common man and the common person who needs to be able to have a place to live and something to eat. And so we need to make sure that everybody is taken care of on that, and that will help us all in the long run. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's no point in having $1 billion in the bank if society's falling apart and you can't get lunch.
Yeah.
But you know, back when we had like that strict quarantine in March and people really were staying at home, I was like thinking, you know, this is the time to go do all that road work. I mean, you don't have traffic and, you know, you could go out there and really go and repair the roads and you can make sure you're keeping safe.
It's a little more complicated than that because they have to, if they're doing heavy construction, they have to have the concrete. It's got to be ready for them and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot more to it than that, and there's all kinds of planning involved and stuff. But I did see that during that time period, that I saw a lot of painting, at least in the neighborhood where I live at. They were out, the crews were out redoing the painting the stripes on the roads and such. And that was something that needed to be done. And that's something that could be done easily without having, all they needed was the paint to be supplied. You know, they didn't need to go through a bunch of contracts and do something complicated, you know, whereas if you're building a new road or building a new bridge, you just can't, it doesn't happen overnight. Projects that I work on, a project I worked on for pipeline, which is infrastructure work, usually a job lasts a year minimum, and that's just to get it started to build it. And usually it takes longer than that. But for me, a typical job lasted a whole year for one project because there was so much planning that had to be involved. And the same is with if you're going to build a freeway and stuff like that, it takes years of planning and engineering and development. They have to make engineering drawings and they have to have bids and somebody has to bid on it and they have to, you know, select the bids and then they have to get the people together to do it and the equipment to do it and all this stuff. And it takes a long time. So there's not, it would have been nice that we could just go ahead and try to fix all the freeways, but the time frame just isn't there. It just can't happen that quickly. But that was a good thing that I was glad that they were doing that they were painting the roads, and that was something that could be done right away and quickly without having without having all this without all this other planning, you know, to do it. You know, it looks like they were taking advantage of it at that, and I was glad they were doing that.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point about the actual road construction, but you know, in addition to the painting, you have like the street cleaning and the inspection and, you know, replacing light bulbs and that type of thing. All those are kind of disruptive to traffic. And, you know, that was like a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody I've talked to is really supportive of space. Some people, you know, have given the argument, you know, why are we worried about going to space? Whenever we have all these problems here, you know, the environment, civil unrest, poverty, you know, whatever. And I was just wondering, how do you kind of address that issue with people like that?
Well, people have to understand that those kind of issues are not about money. Really, it's not necessarily something that you can fix just by throwing money at it. And those are issues that are completely separate. They're not related. You're not going to, by not going to space, you're not going to address those issues. You're not going to fix them. And certainly some things you can spend money on, you know, to help, but it isn't an either or situation. And so it depends on which, and a lot of times we actually produce enough food for everybody, but we're a capitalist society, or mostly a capitalist society, and less socialist. And so it's just a matter of people need to be able to make money, and we set it up so that people have to make the money in order to eat. And so we don't live like people who had a farm and they were self-sufficient out in the middle of nowhere, and you just had to grow your own crops and eat it, and you can eat whatever you grew. That doesn't exist no more. We don't. Today you're depending on somebody else for to build you a place to live, and you're depending on a farm so hundreds of miles away to grow the food for you and everything else. And so it's the issues are different. And so I don't think you just can't just give up on one thing and say that oh, that's going to solve anything. It doesn't solve anything at all. By not going to space, if we cut out the space program, all these other things will not get fixed. I guarantee you. they'll be the same as it ever was, and because it's two separate issues. It's not in one or the other. They both exist at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, back whenever we went to the moon in 1969, the world's population is about over 3 billion people. Now it's over 6 billion people. I mean, we've more than doubled the number of brains on Earth. That should more than double the amount of problem-solving capability that we have.
Well, it's also double amount of problems too. So it goes both ways, you know. And the world overall is economy. People is getting better. There's more middle class people, like in China stuff. You know, are now moving into cities, and you see all these big cities. The United States is no longer the leader. I mean, it used to be all the new skyscrapers and stuff all happening here in the United States, and the tallest buildings are here in the United States. So that's not true anymore. You go to in Saudi Arabia, and what's that Burj? I can't pronounce the name of it. That very tall building in Saudi Arabia, I believe. And all these new stuff is happening elsewhere, and countries that were usually very poor are starting to develop a middle class and are getting better. So I think these kind of getting better. But I think I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, the problems aren't. They're separate issues, you know. And,
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, even whenever it comes to space, money doesn't solve problems. If you don't have like the engineer who has equipment and materials that he needs and is able to test it and build it, you're not going to have a rocket at the end of that. And at the end of the day, I mean, you're not going to address the health issue without actually having doctors or what have you. I mean, people solve problems, not money.
yeah.
And you have to be able to develop those people. And so the question is, are we developing people? And I don't know, I kind of look at our public schools and I wonder if we could do more in terms of developing people.
One thing that kind of bothers me or worries me is that people, if you look at those that are going to school, a lot of times you see them, they're for somebody from outside of the United States. And I noticed that the minorities, it seems like, are the ones who are in going in the medical fields, and the nurses and the doctors there's so many of them. The American generation, native born, are not doing that, and they seemed to have a lot of Native Americans are the whites and people who've been here for a long time don't seem to be interested in going into those kind of fields. And because when I worked at was at Fluor in engineering, being a white guy, I was just kind of a minority. Most of the other people I worked with were from somewhere else. There was a lot of Indian engineers. I worked under an engineer who's a lady from Iran. I've worked with Russians. I've worked with people from all over, and it didn't fit the mold as far as, you know, the population, as far as who was represented in the engineering fields. And it seems like in a lot of the more in medical fields, you see a lot of Asians, and you see less white people. And it's seems to be a problem with the culture, that a lot of the people who are all big on white power, well, there's their own fault that they're not as advanced, you know, and they're poor because they're not going to school. They're not becoming doctors. They're not becoming engineers. They have a mental state of that I think they're lacking in the initiative to do things in those fields, because I know a lot more you might call poor white trash than people who are white and doing engineering and medical and the things that require a degree. And most of the people I know who are in those fields are not WASPs. They're not that. They're people from foreigners, and whose fault is that? I mean, the opportunities were there, and they're not taking advantage of it. And you know, I like to hold mirror up to these people who are, you know, to say that, well, the white man's got this problem and that problem. You know, well, it's your own problem. You cause the problems. It's you. You're the one that's at fault. You're not. You've got the wrong attitude altogether. It's you. It's the people who come over here and who are hungry and willing to work hard and stuff, who are making things happen, and they are. And that seems to be the way I see it.
Yeah, I know there's definitely a sense of entitlement among people who've grown up in the U.S. For many different generations, and they just expect, you know, the fluence and what have you, that just should continue to be easy for them. You know, it's like that they don't have to work for it. I mean, whereas, you know, you have a country like India with over 1 billion people over there. You know, being hungry has a whole different meaning. And, you know, some of them come here and they see the opportunities presented and they're like, oh, wow, this is great. You mean I can get educated, I can find investors, I can start businesses, I can do all this. And they're like, this is, I imagine they're really puzzled about some of the people they see here not taking advantage of that benefit. And I think a lot of it comes back to that the people who are born in a middle-class family today probably is fairly comfortable, lives in a bubble, highly protected, and doesn't know the cost of maybe not having to push themselves. Whereas, you know, that person fresh off the boat from another country, they've seen the other side and they know what it takes, you know, to survive, or at least the cost of not thriving.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think if we really want to have a really strong long-term country, when people are born, we should throw them out of the country. And if they make it back, they can stay.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be pretty funny.
Yeah, but then you get the ones with the initiative and, you know, who really appreciate that journey and what have you. There's another group of people that I've talked to, not many, but enough to be memorable. They're like, hey, we shouldn't go to the moon because we messed up the Earth. Why are we messing up the moon too? And that argument really caught me off guard, because I'm like thinking to myself, you know, the moon is like a dead rock. You know, I'm like, exactly how are you messing it up? You know, but as I started thinking about it, I started becoming aware of maybe a lot of my blind spots, in the sense that maybe there's a lot more to the moon that we're just not seeing because we don't know. And maybe this is a reason not to go, but when we do go, let's go with open eyes, let's go carefully, let's observe our mistakes.
Well, I wouldn't be worried about the moon because, like you said, it's a dead rock. Now, Mars and some of the other places, if there's a chance that there's some kind of native life there, we wouldn't want to destroy that, you know, because I think that's a kind of a precious thing, that if it exists there, if there is life on Mars and underneath the surface, we don't want to mess it up and contaminate it. At least not until we at least find it. You know, we're still looking for it. But I don't think people who are worried about it don't really understand the vastness of space. I mean, the moon is, well, you know, it has 1/6 of gravity. I think there's probably more surface dry land on the moon than there is on the Earth, because we have most of the Earth is water, and so the places there's a lot of space out there, and there's all these asteroids and out there and all these things, and they're just dead rocks, you know, and so I'm not worried about it. So I'm not really that worried about that. I would be concerned with going to Mars and contaminating if there is something there, but once we find out that it's dead, then it really shouldn't matter. I don't think, because it's such an inhospitable place for us. We might want to terraform it if that was possible. I don't know that it is, but I wouldn't be worried about it. And That's part of the reason why I think we should move into space is the fact that we're running out of resources here, and there is the space is so vast, and people don't really understand just how huge it is. It's really mind-boggling, and there's so much places that we can go, and since it's already such a inhospitable place for us, you're not really going to there's not much you can do to it to make it worse. I mean, unless you dump some nuclear fuel or somewhere or something, then it's radioactive and more radioactive than the rest of radioactive space. There's not much you can do to it to really, really mess it up. It's just, it's already dead and inhospitable. And to begin with, there's not really, it should be that big of a concern. And that and the fact that it's just so vast and such huge and it's so spread out that it will take a long time before we can start, impacting that in any way. And actually, that's the reason why we should go out there is the fact that you do less to the earth and leave it alone and do all our heavy industry and that sort, all the nasty, dirty stuff, do it in space far away and leave the earth alone. Let it heal a little bit, from our aggression against it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, is we do know about the damage we're doing on the earth, and we do know how precious life on earth is. If we have a choice between protecting life on earth by using space versus potentially hurting an unknown, messing up space in some way, in an unknown way, I mean, it seems like, there's a very good argument for let's protect the earth. Let's use space to protect the earth, like that's almost, how can you argue with that?
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
So if it was safe and affordable, would you have an interest in going into space?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that would be great. That would be the most amazing thing, to be able to see the Earth from space and to be able to zero G and even on the moon with 1/6 gravity, if they could build a dome, a large space enclosed with in 1/6 gravity, you could just put on a pair of wings and fly around just by flapping your arms, so it would be a great adventure to be able to see that, and with your own eyes, I know that's one thing that your interviews with astronauts, they talk about is how amazing it is to be able to see the Earth from orbit with your own eyes. I'm sure that's a sight that you can't. There's no substitute for that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if after we had like several tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of space tourists go up there and experience themselves, and they talk to their friends, and if that doesn't just create the excitement to go further.
Yeah.
And how safe does it have to be in order for you to go?
If it's probably, you have to be on par with travel by airplane, I imagine. There's never going to be 100% safe. That's never going to happen. But you don't. It's not. But it's going to be pretty rare. It has to be pretty rare. And right now we're getting there. We had the problems with the space shuttle the 2 times we've lost the shuttle, but I think it's going to get better, and we just have to see.
And how far would you go? Just like a suborbital trip, go into orbit for a week, go to the moon, spend multiple years going to Mars and back?
As much as I can afford. That's the thing, it's not going to be cheap, I don't think I would want to go just move them to Mars and stay permanently, but it would be nice to visit. I'm a little old. It's such a long trip. You're going to spend 2 years getting to Mars and back. I would think the moon would be a better choice. In any practical sense. To be able to go to the moon and go to the surface and spend a couple of days on the moon and then come back, and then you have to it's a 3-day trip in and 3-day trip out, so you have all that time in zero G that you can spend and stuff. And there's plenty you'd probably be able to see plenty in that. I think a moon trip would be really nice.
Now, you also mentioned that you didn't think we would actually make it to the moon if it wasn't for Russia in that kind of great power race. Do you see China kind of replacing that role? Or, I mean, what's your thoughts there?
Well, China, their space program isn't right now a big threat to us. They're the tortoise. They're moving slow. Thus far, they really haven't done anything that the United States and Russia had accomplished by the 70s. We had none of the stuff, the things that they're doing currently is that, but they're actually, slowly but surely moving along. They haven't given up on it, and it's just moving at a slower pace. I don't really think we're any, if we sit complacent and there is always a possibility of them catching up to us eventually, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think the real space race that will happen is when India gets their rockets launched, because they've got a manned space program as well. And once they get their first man and stuff, then we'll see a competition probably between China and India, perhaps. I don't know. With things going with SpaceX having commercial and being able to send anybody up with who's got the money, that's going to also be a part of the equation as well. And we might see that may be an impetus a different way. Instead of being strictly a nationality from one country versus another, we may see other things happen. Perhaps, somebody has enough, one of these other countries has developed sufficiently good technology to do that. Maybe they'll start competing on the marketplace for tourism and such. And that would be a little bit different way. But China, as far as a threat as a space race with China, I really don't see it, unless we just really lag behind. I think that seemed like a possibility a couple of years ago when we lost the shuttle and we were having to rely on the Russians to get up. That has changed with SpaceX being able to launch. And if Boeing gets their act together and I get that one running, then we'll have at least two. Ideally, we're going to have three different programs from the United States to be able to put people up. The NASA one, and then there's the two ones that ferry people to the ISS. So there's the potential for lots of things to be happening, and we just have to see how it works out. I don't see this now. That one reason that I might think that China might surprise us is I do know there is an outfit in China who has been experimenting with landing rockets. They're basically copycatting what SpaceX is doing, and they're at the stage that SpaceX was when they were flying their Grasshopper test vehicle, and they've got a test vehicle that they've flown and landed, and they're working on that. So if that comes along, then who knows? They may surprise us in a few years, and catch up real quickly. So it's always easier to do what somebody else has already done, and today building spacecraft is a lot easier than it was for us in the United States and Russia. When we did it for the first time, that technology didn't exist. We didn't have 3D printing. We didn't have CAD. We didn't have so much the technology we didn't have at the time that we had to develop stuff from scratch. Now it's so much easier that a private company can do it. Previously, it took the resource of a whole nation to make that happen. And now one individual company can do it on their own. And so that just shows us how much easier it is to do that. And so there's a possibility of other people, like Japan or in Europe, they have the real technology that if they wanted to and put forth the effort, they could probably put astronauts up on their own. They are already sending unmanned spacecraft up to the ISS for delivery of cargo. but they just haven't put forth the effort into spending the money. They just haven't spent the money really, what amounts to. But they could, you know, you go out on their own and have their own program. Maybe when it becomes even cheaper in a few more years, things become easier. They might start doing that. So we'll see what happens then.
Yeah, and Japan is even launching the United Emirates mission to Mars tomorrow.
Right.
Actually, talking about Japan's capabilities, but you know, I mean, China has actually launched astronauts to space. They had a space station. They're close to having another one. You know, India hasn't launched anybody into space. I think China holds the record for the most launches last year. If not, I think it's really close. So, and China does have one thing that the U.S. Struggles with, and that is the ability to maintain the programs for many, many, many years without significant, you know, changes in direction.
Yeah, they're slow and steady. They're the tortoise, you know, and we might be the hare, but if you know, in the story of the tortoise and the hare, you know, the hare should have just ran to the end of the finish line before he took a nap, you know, and otherwise the tortoise wouldn't have won. But they're slow and steady, and they keep moving, but they so far they haven't moved far enough ahead or haven't caught up to what, you know, the United States had already done and what the Russians had already done by the 70s, you know. But we'll see what happens. You know, maybe this other outfit in China who's going to copy SpaceX, maybe things start happening a little quicker with that. We'll see.
Well, David, those are pretty much all the questions I had. Was there a topic that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on?
I think I was able to squeeze in whatever I wanted to. I talked a lot, so I think I've covered most of the things I would have thought about on the subject, you know, that I can think of. I can't think of anything right now. I just hope, you know, look forward to what's going on, and well, of course, we need to see the astronauts need to come back from the ISS to prove, you know, the SpaceX has a full operational system, and then they'll be, I think, in a couple months they'll be going back up again, and so it's good to see that. I hope Boeing gets their act together, and and they've been messing up, you know, and dragging behind, but that's a kind of hard lesson for them to learn, you know, that they need to get their act together and start sending astronauts themselves, you know. So I think it's really exciting times in space right now. I mean, as exciting as almost as it was when we first were going to the moon, because especially when you bring into all the stuff going on with the space telescopes and to look for extra solar planets and all these other planets out there. They used to, I think it was called the Drake equation. They were, you know, and they always assumed that they didn't know what all the values the equation is, and now it's a known fact that other suns have planets. I mean, to me, it should have been a foregone conclusion that every sun has planets. That should have been, to me, that was just obvious. But people were cautionary about it, and they said, well, maybe not. Maybe suns are out there by themselves and don't have. But that is changing too, and we're learning about new planets that are potential other Earths, you know, around that. That's a very exciting thing. And so since the Hubble you know, space telescopes, there's like about 4 or 5 different space telescopes up right now that are doing a lot of them are looking for other, you know, other planets around other suns. One of the interesting things I recently learned is most of the systems out there are binary. I mean, it used to, it was like science fiction when Star Wars came out that you would have a planet with 2 suns. Now it turns out that's the most common kind. A solar system with 2 suns is more common, or as common as a solar system with just 1 sun. And most asteroids are binary. There's two of them circling each other. Like when we went to Pluto. Pluto and Charon are together, and it's not just Pluto. It's Pluto and Charon, and they're both almost very similar size, and they're circling each other. And it turns out on asteroids they're all binary. So our view of things is different. And most solar systems are binary. There's two stars out there. And I think that's kind of a strange revelation that kind of turned things upside down from the way we used to view things. And so there's a lot of new stuff going on with that. And hopefully we might get a space telescope built on the far side of the moon, and they'll be able to see even farther. You know, in the shadow of the moon, you can get rid of all the noise pollution. You know, I know people complain about Elon putting up his Starlink satellites, you know, of them polluting the sky, but I'm afraid that's just, you have to just deal with it, you know. That's just the way it is. The future for astronomy is in space, and that's happening, and so I think it's kind of exciting, the new things we're learning about the universe and our place in it. You know, I think that's a very interesting thing going on right now.
Yeah, exactly. If we get more people to look up instead of, you know, just looking at their phones or Netflix or what have you, they would probably be a lot more inspired to actually go and see what's up there.
Yeah.
Well, David, I really appreciate your time and helping me with my project, and I look forward to being in touch.
Okay, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.